This session is part of our Dialogues program, and I'd really like to acknowledge Ontario Creates for their support of the industry conference. Just a few housekeeping notes. There is absolutely no professional photography or video recording inside the studio. However, we are live streaming the conference to our website and YouTube, so we just want to say hello to our audiences tuning in. Also, do please feel free to tweet using the hashtag TIFF18 and join online as well. This morning's session is presented in collaboration with the National Association of Theatre Owners, and we'd like to thank them, John, Phil, and Ellis, for their collaboration. It's been really wonderful. So here we are on day 2 of the festival, and public audiences are queuing up at theaters around the city in droves to see films all over the world presented on the big screen. TIFF's mission is to transform the way people see the world through film, and whether it is during the festival or year-round programming at the TIFF Bell Lightbox, we know firsthand how transformative the in-cinema experience can be. As exhibition and the consumer landscapes have changed quite a lot in the past decade, today's session is a very important conversation examining the business and the cultural impacts driving theatrical exhibition today. We have a wonderful, diverse roster of guests, and I would like to introduce the president of the National Association of Theatre Owners, John Fithian, to introduce our guests. Please welcome John Fithian.
Good morning. Come on out, fellow panelists. So it's exciting to be here on the first industry program day of TIFF. Thank you all for joining us. I know you have many movies to see, and so we'll try to dispatch with the substantive matters in brief order. But it's my honor to be joined by such an esteemed panel this morning. And they're arranged kind of in the order of the business, right? So Helen Esterbrook, to my far right, your far left, is a film and television producer, producing such films as Tully, the upcoming Hugh Jackman film, The Frontrunner, which is screening here at TIFF. And for her work on Whiplash, she was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Picture. On the television side, Helen is a producer for Hulu's Golden Globe-nominated series Casual. To Helen's left is Sebastián Lelio, born in Santiago, Chile, and graduated from La Escuela de Cine de Chile. His features include The Year of the Tiger, Gloria, Disobedience, and A Fantastic Woman. And on that last picture, of course, as you know, he won the Academy Award for Foreign Language Film. Sebastian's quite the TIFF veteran, as all of those movies screened here at the festival, and of course, Gloria Bell is his latest film, which is also screening here. And then moving from production to direction to distribution, we have Chris Aronson to Sebastian's left. Chris is the president of domestic distribution for 20th Century Fox, where he oversees all domestic theatrical distribution for sale in the US and Canada. He's a member of the Academy and its executive branch and its executive committee of the executive branch. And at TIFF this year, Fox has 2 very high-profile movies in The Hate U Give and Widows, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then to Chris's left, my right, is Ellis Jacob, the president and CEO of Cineplex. That's Canada's largest motion picture exhibition company. More importantly for me, he also serves as the chairman of the National Association of Theatre Owners, and therefore he is my boss, which is why I keep him very close to me. In 2013 and 2014, Ellis was awarded the Most Innovative CEO Award from Canadian Business Magazine, and for his contributions to the entertainment and movie exhibition industry, he received the Order of Canada. So again, thank you, esteemed panelists, for coming together today. A quick note on format. I know that TIFF is an audience-involved festival, both at its screenings and at its industry events. So I'll pose some questions over the first 40 or 45 minutes or so with the panelists, but then I'll try to make sure that we keep about 15 minutes at the end for your questions as well. So be thinking of them, have them ready. And then some of us have schedules that permit to hang out in the lobby after the panel's done. So if you didn't get a chance to ask your questions in public, several of us will be out there afterwards to try to continue the dialogue for a bit. So again, thank you for coming. Since we set this up kind of sequentially in the way of the flow of the business, I'm gonna start with Helen as our representative producer and ask, as someone who makes product both for the big screen and for television, both for theatrical and for streaming, Can you tell us how you differentiate thinking about that content? What makes a good TV show and what makes a good theatrical release?
It's funny, I think the exciting and terrifying thing about right now is that all of the rules are broken. I used to be very clear that I felt like film was a place where you could sort of really focus on one theme and say or ask one thing, and TV or streaming was all about sort of characters. And I'm here with a movie that I think asks many things, and I'm having a hell of a time getting my character-driven TV show sold. So I think it's a strange time, and I think that it really is just about figuring out the story that you want to tell and finding the place that's going to give you the best resources to tell it. And to whatever extent you can match the aesthetic and the creative with the distribution model. And I feel like that's my job as a producer is making sure that the creative and the business are aligned in the best way. And it's really I think you have to take a much more specific look at it these days and figuring out what's the best way to tell the story.
And do you have tussles with your creatives on which way they go? Do you sometimes have creatives who think it's a theatrical release, but it's more of a TV show, or vice versa?
No, but I think the trick is oftentimes, like, I have a TV show that we took out recently that didn't sell, and so now we want to try to make it a movie, and sometimes you don't know, and sometimes the trick is realizing how much you really need to change the story, change the structure to have it succeed in a slightly different medium.
And I also should have said on format at any point in time, even though we'll kind of go down the row, if our other panelists want to chime in on the questions asked, this should be as free-flowing as possible. All right, The Frontrunner, your movie here at TIFF. I was a big Gary Hart fan back in the day, and we're looking forward to it. Very topical film. How, related to the last question, how would you view the importance of the theatrical experience for that film as an art form, but then also segue it into the business and talk about how, if that film produces at a certain level theatrically, what that means for your business in the home markets and the ancillary markets?
Yeah, I think that one of the exciting things about making The Frontrunner is that we made it in a very sort of classical filmmaking style. It's really an homage to The Candidate and movies from like that. So I think that the exciting thing is that we hope people go see it in the theater because of the filmmaking aspect. But the thing that we realized that I found really interesting while we started showing it to audiences, and I mean when we were doing sort of smaller friends and family screenings, was that because it is very topical and because in some ways because it brings up a lot of issues a lot of questions I think we're all asking ourselves today about the current political situation, it meant that it was really important for us to see it with other people because people assumed they knew how other people were going to look at it. So, for example, we did this small screening once, and it was like half baby boomers and half millennials. And the baby boomers came out of the screening being like, well, I really liked it, but the millennials aren't going to understand, blah, blah, blah. And the millennials came out of it being like, well, we really liked it, but the baby boomers are going to think this about it. And it was like everyone had an opinion on someone else's opinion, and to be able to be in the room and have them actually have that conversation was so important because then they were like, oh, okay, sorry, we assumed X, Y, Z. And those conversations were really fun for us to be a part of in the early screenings of it. And, that's one of the many reasons we're very excited to be showing it here and have bigger audiences come and see it and have those conversations.
And then how does that conversation and that run business-wise drive your home markets and your home sales?
Well, I think it's just, conversation begets conversation. People want to be a part of it then when they've heard more about it, and when it's when you're not able to dismiss something, when you're not able to categorize it, when you're saying, oh, this is something that people want to see for a variety of reasons, and it could appeal to a wider audience, that's just going to make people want to see it in different arena, I would hope.
So Sebastian, A Fantastic Woman was a big breakout film for you. And I guess I'd, with my own bias, like to ask, when was the first time you experienced that in a theater with an audience, and how does that affect your creative choices? The fact that you're designing a movie for the audience when you're conceptualizing a film, how does that affect what you're doing creatively?
Well, thank you for the invitation. The case of A Fantastic Woman is quite special, I would say, because I was coming out of having done Gloria, which was a film that, within its scale for a Spanish language film, did really well. And when we started writing about A Fantastic Woman, which is a story that centers around a transgender woman, the transgender subject wasn't still like in the cultural discussion yet. It was an intuition, and then as we moved closer to production, I started to see covers of magazines and more presence and more political discussion around the subject, and I was like, wow, maybe, I mean, something is happening in relationship to the subject of the film. It seems that it might have the chance to resonate with the current times. But it wasn't, of course, like a totally designed strategy. It was more like, you know, an intuition. And then when the film was released, of course, the theatrical experience was unforgettable for me. I was just finishing shooting my first film in English, Disobedience, the night before. And I had to fly to Berlin from London. So I was kind of like lost and a bit detached from the film that I had already finished a few months ago. And so, you know, in Berlin, the theaters are big, so it was a huge audience, and I was prepared to be crucified. and because it is a subject that generates so much division, and I was tempted to take a look at the National Geographic Instagram account when they published, not far away from the release of the film, the cover of a special issue about the shifting landscape of sexual identity, which was, to me, quite iconic. And then I started to take a look at the commentaries, and it was quite violent in terms of how different the visions were. Half of them were like, you know, this is an aberration, and these people should be locked up, kind of attitude. So operating from fear. And the other half was like, this is, for some reason, very inspiring. There is something beautiful here that I cannot like put my finger on it, but it's like, it is good. And I was like, okay, this is what we are going to face. And then, so I was tired, nervous, and absent. and I couldn't really like connect with the film during the screening. And I thought, okay, this is the end. I have to look for another profession, and you know, and then the film finished, and the applause was so vivid and long and intense and heartfelt, and the first tweeters with the commentaries and the critics appeared, and everyone in the team was like with happy faces, and I was like, I just didn't realize that the film clicked. And connected until a few hours later. But of course, that way of, for a film to be born, you know, in front of, I don't know, 2,000 people coming from different places of the world, and shows that, you know, film have the capacity to speak a language that is universal, and that despite your origins or your cultural proceedings, or your assumptions, or your systems of belief, you can be touched, you can be modified, you can be changed, you can be inspired, challenged by a film, and I think that's important. For me, filmmaking has always been about inspiration. You know, I go to see a film because I want to come out of the cinema inspired. I want to be more hungry for life. I want to feel that energy. And when I whenever I have the privilege of having the chance to make a film, I'm always trying to somehow provide that to the spectators.
Well, I think on behalf of cinema operators around the world, we want to thank you for bringing diverse voices to the screen, right? I mean, we get accused of being an industry that's all male and all white all the time. And a lot of that's there. And the dialogue in the last few years about changing that dominant presence in our industry is hugely important. And so for that movie, and now you've got Gloria Bell, it's also about a leading woman. You're bringing diverse voices to the screen, and that helps us appeal to diverse audiences. So how important is that to you to think about the diversity of your content or your lead actors and trying to bringing different themes to the screen? And talk about Gloria Bell as well, just for a minute, please.
Well, it's not that I'm like feeling a void. I'm not operating like that. You know, I'm like, for me, diversity should be the new normality. You know, the new standard. I mean, this idea of diversity being something out there is kind of like old, I would say. You know, like there is a diversity here, and there should be everywhere, and we should, I don't know, like I think embrace the complexity of life, you know, and the diversity plays a big role in that. And when the films I've made after Gloria have been seen through this angle, you know, like somehow I know they have been about characters that are not usually protagonists, you know, they are usually secondary characters, and the game of these films have been to put them in the absolute center and to in a certain way to say to them, you are a film, you deserve a film. But it's because I find inspiration there, and I think it's moving for me, and it's exciting, and it's dangerous, and it's, you know, it challenges me, and that's why I have had this tendency in the last few films I've made. But I think that people appreciate that because, you know, I think we get tired of seeing the same things over and over again. Like, I think it's important that diversity is expressed in the subjects, but at the same time, it's important to preserve the diversity in the voices that are making the films.
I'm going to stick with this diversity theme as a transition to Chris, because you got two big titles here with Hate You Give and Widows playing at the festival. And Fox has always been about a range of movies, right? Diverse content in big budgets, medium and small with Searchlight, diverse content in the themes you're portraying, the actors you're picking, the directors you're working with. So Chris, pick that up a little bit on how important that range or diversity is to your slate as you're appealing to moviegoers and what it means for your business.
Well, I think our slate is reflective of moviegoers in general, and we know that one size doesn't fit all. And movies are about storytelling, and filmmakers have different stories to tell, and audiences have different stories that they want to see and experience. You know, listening to Helen and Sebastian, the theme to me is the discourse and the dialogue from that audience. And what moves and challenges you as a filmmaker is sort of the same experience for the audience. Move them, challenge them. And that's what I think, that's why cinemas matter. And I think our slate is we try to make films and give homes to filmmakers to tell their stories for the diversity of human beings that we are. And there are a lot of them, a lot of stories, and a lot of human beings.
So put that in the business context, right? You're the studio exec, which is why it's appropriate that you're the suit, wearing the suit.
I knew he was going to the suit part. I knew he was.
So you're part of this group that decides what movies get greenlit, and it's all about numbers, and it's all about returns, and it's all about driving your stock price, and how do you merge that thought you just expressed about diverse content with lots of different audiences that need to be served with that brutal process of greenlighting a movie, and how does a movie get approved, and in that context, and part of that also is for all the platforms, right? How does theatrical play into the greenlighting process? How does the home release play? What goes through that core of powerful studio people sitting there saying yes or no to this movie?
So have you ever asked a sausage manufacturer how it works? God, I hope not. It's a very complicated process, but at the end of the day, it's really not. Because it starts with a filmmaker and the filmmaking team, and again, that story. And it starts with the passion for that story. And yes, I work for a major studio, so we do things a little bit differently than an independent distributor or producer. But at the end of the day, we are in service of the filmmaker and the story. And if we put together a slate, but I can guarantee you we never put together a slate of films that says we need one of these here and we need two of these there. That's just, it's not the way it works. And I think, when for a studio that has made everything from X-Men movies to The Greatest Showman to the two films that we're going to premiere here at TIFF this year, two films that we're incredibly proud of, that's what it's all about. And then my job is to figure out where these films can not only survive but thrive, and find that audience that is the broadest possible to share in those stories. And that's a whole nother subject, but it is complicated, and working with our partners in exhibition and trying to find the right competitive windows to enable our films to open up and breathe like a bottle of wine, a good bottle of wine.
So one adjunct to that question, which I didn't warn you about, is the international marketplace, the growing receipts from theatrical around the world versus domestic, and by domestic I mean the US and Canada, because it's considered your domestic market. How has that changed the greenlighting process? How has that changed the movies that make it to the big screen, because so much money's coming in from Canada and all these from China and all these new places, and not the traditional percentage coming out of the US and Canada?
Look, it's another piece of the puzzle, is what it is. And when you put together a film and greenlight a film, there are a lot of assumptions that get made. And when you roll up all of those assumptions, we decide whether or not it's green or it's red. And sometimes it's amber, and meaning that you have to wait for certain elements to come together to turn it into a green. But the world, our product is truly working in a global marketplace, and I think the world, and I think film audiences around the world are becoming less compartmentalized, and I think they're becoming much more open to different types of films and different types of people and actors, and not caring what they look like, but caring about the stories that they tell, because that's the universal theme of cinema. And I love that reaction of the boomers and the millennials, but the best part and why cinemas matter to me is because you had all those people in the same room.
No, but that was exactly my point. Had we not, I think it's much, when people have opinions on other people's opinions, it's very easy to dismiss things, and so to be able to have that conversation, I think, is hugely important.
Yeah, and look, I think we all watch and consume content in our homes, and you might be by yourself, and you might be with a friend, but it's a pretty narrow band of reaction, unless you want to look in the mirror, which we all do every day, but that becomes boring after a while to have that conversation. But when you have all of these different and diverse reactions to the same thing, that's what makes it all go around and gives you a different perspective on what you just experienced. And you might have seen it this way, but Sebastian saw it that way. And that's the magic of cinema.
So we've moved from creation to distribution, and of course we end up where the movie appears on the big screen and exhibition. And in our business, it takes both really good movies and a really good movie-going experience for our business to thrive. Ellis at Cineplex, one of the biggest innovators in a really good movie-going environment. Tell us what's new. What are the innovations that's working and not? How are you using new technologies or new ways of design or new food and beverage to make that cinema experience something special?
And John, that's a great question because, again, we don't create the content, but we create the experience. And for us, it's really important to have that experience so special that you walk out of the theater feeling like you really had an experience that's totally different from what you could get watching a 50-inch TV screen or on your cell phone. And in the past, you probably watched a movie in 1 or 2 formats. Maybe you saw it in 2D or IMAX. Today, you can go to some of our theaters and watch a movie in 7 different ways. You can watch it in 2D, 3D, 4DX, D-Box, IMAX, Ultra AVX, VIP, loungers. There's so many choices, and the younger audiences want choice. And that's what we've been able to create with the new cinema of the future. And we continue to tweak that as we move forward. We've even created specific auditoriums for kids. We are experimenting with that as we move forward to keep all of those different demographics engaged. And when we talk about youngsters and the younger demographic, everybody says they're not coming back to the movies, and that's absolutely not true. 50% of our scene members are under the age of 35. We've gone into virtual reality. We've gone into esports. Why? Because we want to keep those demographics engaged and having that experience all of the time. And we did the same thing with the older demographics when we brought in opera and we brought in the other alternative contents that they wanted to see. So I think the cinema experience is a really important part of the food chain, and it's the engine that drives the train as to why people go and see movies. It's a communal event, like Chris said.
So I'll ask our 3 other panelists before I come back to Ellis another question to give us your take on the modern movie-going experience. What works for your films, what doesn't? What would you like to see our theater owners do differently? What's your take on the cinema-going experience?
Oh, okay. No, I mean, I think it's, listen, as a movie goer, I love a visceral experience in a movie theater. Whether that is, something like Mad Max, which was an incredible, just like, heart-pounding thing, or even I saw this movie last week at Telluride called Free Solo. That's a documentary that was so exciting. My hands were sweating the entire time. And it was because we were in a theater and it was something like that. That's really fun. But I also think that, that you can have that with an emotional thing. You can have that with any good story. I think it's, I don't know. Why am I talking? Yeah.
Hey, I have to be careful. I have to live with him.
We can move you apart a little bit.
No.
If you want to speak truth to power, Chris.
We're allies. Look, I think one of the things, and I'll limit this to Ellis, one of the things that Ellis does incredibly well is listen to his audience. And that's why you have 7 different ways to consume content, because the audience ultimately decides. And I think it's our job as an industry to give the audience what they want. From our side, it's giving them content that they want. On your side, it's creating an environment that they want to leave their homes and go consume content outside of their homes. The old stupid line of every house has a kitchen, but it doesn't mean you want to cook every night. Yeah. It's the same thing. Everyone's got one of these screens in their home, but there's something about going out to the cinema. And again, if we provide content that audiences want to see and you create the right environment, our industry will be just fine.
And of course, where can you go and see a $100 or $200 million experience for less than it costs you to park your car? And that's what we are providing as far as, exhibitors.
All right, so let's change gears a little bit and tackle a topical issue, if you will, and that is that coming out of Venice last week, now at TIFF this week, there's a lot of discussion on streaming services versus theatrical and the question of Netflix having 7 movies here at TIFF. Ellis, we'll start with you, but I'd love everyone to chime into this one. What's your take on streaming and theatrical and all the public debate going on right now?
Chris, as the biggest exhibitor in Canada, our preference is always to have movies play on the big screen. And as we've seen, the communal experience is so important as far as enjoying that particular movie. And I remember a number of years ago flying on an airplane, and there was somebody sitting next to me watching a movie on the small screen, and I didn't know. I got talking to him, and he said, I'm the goaltender for the team in Edmonton, the hockey team. So I said, so how come you're watching the movie on the small screen? He says, every movie I watch is at your Cineplex theater before I ever watch it on my small screen. So he likes and wants that communal experience of going and seeing. You can't duplicate that in your living room, not from the perspective of laughing and crying together and having a good time without disturbance. And to me, that's really, really important. Now, with streaming, I think streaming can live at the same time as big movie theaters do. We've had television. We've had a lot of disruptions. In my 30-odd years in the industry, one thing we know is things are always changing. And this is part of that change that's taking place. But we are seeing companies like Amazon, which basically have had movies like Manchester by the Sea, The Big Sick. They gave it the proper theatrical and basically, got a number of awards and also have respected that window, and there's a lot of buzz about it. I bet you if we ask this audience how many people remember the last Netflix movie original content that they saw, it probably will get maybe a dozen people raise their hands. But if we ask about Mission Impossible, Avengers, and Crazy Rich Asians, I'm sure a lot of the people in this room have seen it, because that's the buzz that the experience is created when it comes to that cinema channel. And I think that's really, really critical for the future of the business. And it's a $40 billion plus industry worldwide, and close to 11.5 billion in North America. I don't think it's an industry that I expect is going away anytime soon. There are changes, but with the content we have from our partners, we will continue to have those experiences, and the changing offerings in our theaters will keep people coming back.
Yeah, things have always changed, but they haven't changed as fast as they are changing now. The evolution of this business has never moved at a faster pace. I have I don't know if it's a different take, but this industry, the theatrical industry, has faced challenges through its, approximately 100 years in existence. And I look at streaming, whoever you want to put in that category, as yet another challenge. The difference now is that that challenge is one that we should be up to meeting. And the challenge is quite simply, and the audience has shown this time and time again, there is no tolerance for subpar films. If there is a film that is made for whatever reason and there is not an audience for it, guess what? They're not going to go. And guess what else? They're not going to consume it later on in the ancillary markets. There's no home entertainment market for a theatrical film that has failed. So to me, the challenge for all theatrical content producers is to make films that people want to see. Because the audience proves time and time again, if you give them what they want, they will go. Period. And it doesn't take a genius to look up on any box office number site to figure out how many movies there are that fail and that clutter up the system and lose lots of money, frankly.
But Chris, what's the greatness in our business is like a movie like Crazy Rich Asians. There's no way anybody would have contemplated that that movie was going to do the box office it did. And it was one of the few movies in Canada where from the first week to the second week, the box office actually went up. And that doesn't happen too often.
Not since The Greatest Showman, Ellis.
That's true.
That's part of it, right? The surprise.
Yep,
in
it
our
is.
business, we're not Tim Hortons. We don't sell the same product every week. It changes every Friday. Something new is coming out, and we don't know if it's going to work or not until the audience comes and gives us their judgment. And for those of us in the cinema business, if I may exercise my moderator's prerogative a bit, that's what the theatrical release exclusivity window is about. It's about giving good movies a chance to be established and to grow and become part of the cultural conversation and not be lost. And we want filmmakers with their visions to come to our big screens and have that experience and have that chance to grow and expand. And picking up on some of what Ellis said, another challenge for us is there's this public description of streaming and theatrical as being opposed to each other, and nothing could be further from the truth, right? Streaming's been great this year, and we're having a record-breaking year at the box office. Both can coexist. And the other angle here, and Ellis hit on this, is that it doesn't have to be streaming or theatrical. It's just respect the models that work in both places. And honestly, the movie theater door is open to Netflix if they want to come and play an exclusive window in theatrical, let that product build, have it be a conversation, and then take it to Netflix customers later and exclusively. That's a model that works for Amazon. It can work for us. It's not either or. People can try both these systems if they want to. So hopefully we can find a way to work better together on how we release these movies. But
Yeah, it's definitely a different medium. And I don't want us to devolve in talking about that, but as filmmakers, you spend a lot of time creating a piece of content. And when you're part of the conversation theatrically, it lives, and it is part of the cultural conversation. Going the other way, you hope that it's part of a conversation. But from a publicity standpoint, it's sort of this, it goes into a void, and it's next, next, next. And that's the beauty of theatrical. And I think the acknowledgement that people both in front of the camera and behind the camera get when you have a successful theatrical release not be replicated.
Sorry that I talk about a film I made, but you know, in A Fantastic Woman, I think what happened with the film, which was unexpected, has a lot to do with the communal experience. That seminal projection in Berlin spread out, you know, and became fertile, and it created a lot of conversation and awareness around the subject. I wasn't trying to make a political film, but a film that people could enjoy and have a cinematic experience, visceral, as you said, a word I love. But then a week ago, a transgender bill was approved in Chile. And I think we all know it has a lot to do with the fact that the film got an Oscar and it became part of the cultural conversation. And I'm not saying, of course, that this is always the case, but this proves the power of what happens when people get together, feel together, think together, and then talk about something. And what is, I don't know if concerning, but you know, worth observing is the fact that if a film doesn't have that chance, then where does the conversation go? To, you know, and I think that is somehow operating against the DNA of cinema. That's my impression.
Helen, anything?
Well, it's interesting because I agree with everything that's being said, obviously. I do think that, you know, yeah, I mean, I think obviously my sort of then lost point earlier was like you can have a big giant movie that works really well in a cinema, and you can have a documentary that works really well. I do think there's also the one thing that has helped with some of the streaming platforms, and I can't speak to the specifics of distribution because I know very little about it, but that has opened up that people are seeing more content. I think it did sort of help open up the diverse voices that we were talking about before, and people are realizing that that is content people are seeking. So I do think in some ways it's not just a challenge, it can also help those of us making things realizing that there are, that we can say, look, these things are doing well in a variety of platforms, and obviously you always want your film to play in a theater first, but I think it's nice to have all these different ways for people to seek out movies, because I grew up in a small town in Illinois and I didn't have the access to it in the same way.
Choices, excellent. So I think that's a good place to break and to make an opportunity for our audience to get engaged. I'm not quite sure how this works. There may be roving microphones. Yes, I see a hand out there. So the lights are bright. I can't see. Anybody who wants to jump in, don't be bashful. Your coffee's working. And if you would just tell us a little bit about who you are before you fire off your question, that'd be great.
My name is Iman, last name Juno. I'm here with Creative Mind Group, so I'm pretty much in an internship program. I just graduated from college, and I'm pursuing a career in film, filmmaking, director. And my first question was, you mentioned something about assumptions about greenlighting, and I was just trying to get clarity on what are some of the assumptions about greenlighting films.
That's you, Chris.
No, I'm aware. You conveniently threw greenlighting at me. Again, it starts with the story and a script. It always does. It starts with a script and ends with a script. Everything in between is the execution of that script in the hands of, great directors and producers and your talent associated with it. I guess in the coarsest way, the assumptions being made are financial ones, because at the end of the day, we are running a for-profit business. We don't greenlight movies to lose money. I mean, that's the bottom line. It does happen. But I will tell you that there are times when we knew it was a risky proposition and we may not come out on it, but we respected the filmmaker and the storytelling so much that we wanted to give the avenue for that filmmaker to tell that story. But again, in its course way, it's about how much money can we make on this movie. But it's also, look, I will tell you, I've worked in independent film, I've worked now for a long time in commercial film, but what gets my juices flowing every day is that I still look at this business as art meets commerce. And it's what keeps me excited about this business.
I would add, in terms of the theatrical aspect of getting movies out there, is that technology is going to make our platform more accessible to all kinds of films. Because in the old days, you had your P&A budget, which meant prints and advertising, and really expensive celluloid film prints had to be shipped all around the world. They're fragile. In a digital world now, and we're done with the funding process called the virtual print fee system, which I won't bore you with the details, but basically, when that funding process is done, digital technologies make cinemas much more accessible because the cost of actually getting a movie into the cinema is virtually nothing compared to maybe $1,000 to $1,500 per print per run in the old days. So we're hopeful that this conversation about the diversity of voices and content can be coupled with technological easing of access to make it possible for more films to actually get into our over here.
Hi, I'm Layla. I'm a documentary filmmaker and a graduate student with York's film program. So I just wanted to touch off of the point that was made earlier by, I believe, Ellis, Crazy Rich Asians, the assumption that it was not going to do that well. I'm just wondering why that's the assumption. And just to kind of segue into my question, for you, Chris, I suppose, how do you determine what films audiences want to see? Like, is there research that goes into that? Do you consult with different folks of different racialized groups, different gender groups, different sexual-oriented groups? What do you guys do to determine what audiences want to see because I know like a lot of it has to do with publicity, but with globalization and obviously diversity in communities, how do we really know what, I guess, mainstream media or even indie films, how do we determine what audiences want to see?
If I may say one thing about Crazy Rich Asians that Ellis said, and I don't want to speak for you, but I'm going to.
Go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead.
Is it, he didn't say that it wasn't going to do business. What he said was that the industry was surprised that it was as big as it was, and it has carried on the way it has. Because we have a very sophisticated suite of tools to try to anticipate box office, and there are certain expectations. And the film was always going to be, it was eagerly anticipated, and it was always going to be successful. But what it did do, it exceeded even those expectations, and then in its subsequent weeks had just taken off and found a whole new audience. It was a given on the subject matter that the Asian population was going to support the film. In week one, I believe the Asian percentage was close to 40%.
Over, yeah.
Right. And then by week two, that had dropped to 28% because everybody else was catching on to, hey, this is a great movie. And the rest, as they say, is history.
And Chris, I think the social aspect of today with people able to communicate so easily, and the number of people that had read that book really created that big buzz about it, and that's what rolled it forward and did extremely well in week two and continued to have legs through the run of the movie.
But let's be honest, we are, to answer your question, we are fighting bias across the board in our business, right? And all the studies keep showing the large percentage of white males in the position of producer, director, actor, extra, you name it, right? And when the people who are making, buying, distributing, and exhibiting movies are overwhelmingly white males, they will overwhelmingly pick product that they can relate to, right? Even, it's not a conscious discrimination thing, it's just what can I identify as a white male. And so we've been arguing for years that diversity in all of those aspects isn't just the right thing to do, it's great for business. And you know, I did a bunch of press interviews after Black Panther in February, and there was just this, wow, really an all-black cast can create this kind of results? And again, with Crazy Rich Asians, probably only the second major movie we've had with an all Asian or Asian American cast. And so there is even today, there is this lingering bias of what can work and what can't work commercially as a movie. But I think we're making a tremendous amount of progress, and the last couple of years have been really, really encouraging in the commercial viability of diverse voices and diverse casting. So we're encouraged.
But John, in fairness, it's not just about gender and race. At Cineplex today, we play movies from so many different countries with where these countries' movies, like the Bollywood movies, outgross the Hollywood movies. And to me, if I look back 20 years ago to today, there's been a huge shift in being able to see those movies and have those experiences for people from those backgrounds. And I think that's all part of creating experiences that appeal to all of the demographics that we sell to.
We obviously liked your question, but we're going to go back.
Let me just address the second part of your question. The answer is yes. We do a tremendous amount of research. But again, it starts with that story and that script and knowing or at least identifying who is the audience for this story. You know, and we had a film, hopefully many of you saw it, Love, Simon, which from Greg Berlanti, which was a wonderful film. And we knew that the LGBT community would support the film, or at least we hoped that they would. But our task was, how do we take this story, which is universal? The story itself was, yes, about a high school kid who was afraid to come out, but was a universal story of love and acceptance. So our challenge was, how do we take this film that you would think is going down this narrow channel here, but make it this broad expressway of a story? And I'm extremely proud of our CEO for championing this film and our filmmaking team and being able to, I think they called us the first major studio gay commercial film, some moniker like that. But we were incredibly proud to be able to bring that story to cinemas around the world.
Let's go back here in the corner.
Hi, my name's Amanda. I'm here with my university, Oakland University, with the Cinema Studies students. And I guess my question is mainly just for Sebastian. When you were making A Fantastic Woman, did you realize or ever wonder or think that it was going to be as big as it was, or like as profound as it ended up being in the movement?
No. No, I mean, you know, that film in Chile, with these hands, you know, like, I mean, things work differently there. Like, you make films, the industry is very fragile, and it's not, we don't have the periodicity that a stronger industry can provide for filmmakers. So either you make your own films somehow, or no one will call you for anything. You know, like, there's no scripts going around. There's no, that system doesn't exist. I think it's because of the small country, and the market is small, and so my generation, some of my filmmaker friends, we've been trying to make films that can, you know, strongly resonate with our reality, but at the same time become part of the global conversation. And that was somewhere in the back of my mind while making it, but really I thought it was going to be, I didn't know if we were going to be able to overcome the challenge of bringing a subject that used to belong to the, so to say, narratives that are peripheral, and provide an experience that can be felt, I won't say as a mainstream experience, but as a movie that is generous enough to invite, for everyone to be invited to that party, you know? That was like the spirit of it. And, but then of course we never anticipated what was going to happen, which is in a certain way, when film overflows the screen and become somehow part of the fabric of society, which is what strongly happened in Chile. And I would say maybe, hopefully it contributed as well to the conversation in some other countries. Yeah, but no, the answer is no.
Let's go back up over here.
Hi, my name is Rafael. I'm from Brazil, but based as a producer in Los Angeles. I wanted to go more towards the questions of international films doing well in the domestic box office. I was living in London last year. My parents live in a small town in Brazil. It's funny how it's so hard in LA sometimes to find films that are from other countries such as Europe, and then I go back to London or even Sao Paulo, and then I have more access to films from other countries. And you go to US, and I have so many friends that, oh, I'm lazy to read subtitles. And I know the problem goes all down to how can we do to, in a few years, have films such as Fantastic Women, have, you did really well in box office, let's say, for the size of the film, but how should we do as a young producer like me that are now looking for projects that are developing for the next few years to be able to have people in the US and Canada accepting more films from other countries? And of course, Mad Men is a fantastic film, and you have so many other films from studios that do really well. I would love to have my kids in the next few years watching films that go beyond just a superhero. And sometimes I think that in a city such as LA, which is the center of cinema, you have a hard time finding art films. How can you, in other towns, access those people? So I actually wanted to understand from you guys' point of view there, in the head of the industry, what could we do for the next few years to try to change that?
You're all relevant
there's
to
so
that
many ways to go after that one. But I love the point about subtitling, and I will tell you that, when I sort of grew up going to movies, there were a lot of subtitled films because there were a lot of brilliant filmmakers, and those films worked. I think when it comes to foreign films and subtitling, I think there is an inherent bias in the domestic market. I attribute it to the dumbing down of the audience. Hate to say it, but then again, if you look at the current political landscape, you understand that. And I think one of the ways of turning
the American in Canada.
Yeah, that's right.
I try to be, it really starts on a grassroots effort. I would, as a parent, show my kids these great films and get them accustomed to watching and consuming content in different forms. I think that's what it's all about. But again, if there are stories that are worthy of being told, it doesn't matter. If they're dubbed or they're subtitled, it's all about those characters on the screen and the story they're telling. But I hear you. Ultimately, in the cinema business, films will be exhibited if there's an audience for them. Period, end of story.
Of course, like you said about your greenlighting, it's a dollars and cents thing at the end of the day, even when it comes to exhibiting them. And studios make that decisions. Exhibitors are in positions where that's also part of the challenge.
So we need you to make them.
Indeed. Bring it on. I think we have time for one last question, which is always the hardest one to pick. I'll let my TIFF organizers pick the last person because then I don't get in trouble. So you guys pick. Who's going? That guy? Okay.
I'll take two.
Thank you. Peter West, an MBA student. A question about the business model of blockbusters and the reliance on blockbuster income, and also sort of the constraints of with the box office. How do you see yourself facing the challenge with moving away blockbuster reliance, and how do you address the problem of seasonality with the box office?
Well, I think this week is a prime example. Last year, this weekend, the box office was not looking too good, and there's a movie called It that opened. And to everybody's surprise, in the middle of September, which is not the best time of year from a box office perspective, we had a huge hit on our hands. So one thing we can say, and Chris, you can comment, is this is a 52-week-a-year business. People will come to the movie theaters if the content is there and it's what they want to see. Yes, we have periods of high incidence of the big movies during the summer periods and also through U.S. Thanksgiving and Christmas, but we have movies that are performed all the way through the year.
That is true. Definitely true. From the blockbuster side, yeah, the more money you have invested in a film, there is a certain amount of logic that says the higher the risk, the less risky the release window you need to put it in. I mean, you just have to. We wouldn't release, so who knows, not release an X-Men movie on the It weekend. Just because the audience is more weighted toward a weekend business, whereas in holiday or summer, it becomes more of a 7-day-a-week business. It is a 7-day-a-week business, but the percentages of people going are just greater at certain times of year.
But I would challenge you, Chris, and say Black Panther, February, had room to run and played like crazy as a blockbuster forever. So on that happy note, though, won't you join me in thanking such a great group of panelists for coming to our show?
Holidays.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you again at 1:30 to talk about blockchain. See you then.